California has the world's fifth biggest economy. Its whopping GDP of $3.6 trillion is bigger than that of India, the UK, or Russia. California is by far America's most populous state, with almost 40 million people. The next biggest is Texas, with around 30 million. That is more people than Canada and more than the populations of Belgium, Portugal, and Austria combined. California isn't just one of America's biggest states geographically, it's bigger than many countries. With a landmass of some 425,000 square kilometers, you could easily fit in South Korea, Cuba, and Greece with room to spare. The Golden State also has one of America's biggest gaps to income inequality, with the highest income families earning roughly 11 times more than those at the bottom. Managing the state of California is basically the same as managing a country. It's a massive job, so massive that many people argue it's time for California to break up into 2 or even 3 smaller states. They claim that it would make things not only more manageable, but it would also give Californians a greater representation in Washington. This isn't a recent phenomenon either. Ever since California was founded back in 1850, people have questioned the logic of such a huge size and land remaining a single state. To date, there have been some 220 proposals to split California up into smaller states. So, let's look at the reasons why people do and don't want Californians to split, and how likely that is to happen. The call to break up the state began almost as soon as California was founded. It was thought to be too large for one state government to control, and petitions were drawn up to separate the northern and southern parts of the state. When California became the 31st state in 1850, it had a population of around 92,000 people. 10 years later, that number has tripled to a total of 380,000 people, with many coming in search of gold. It was thought that the population growth would eventually level out and even decline, but populations in California have continued to surge. In fact, the population growth has happened every year right up until 2022, when it recorded negative growth for the first time ever. In 1859, a bill was sent to Congress proposing California become 2 states. It was supported by both the governor and large numbers of the public. It was argued that not only would the 2 states be easier to manage, but it simply made sense given the cultural and geographical differences between the North and the South. The timing was off, though. With a civil war brewing, the bill was simply dismissed as a low-priority matter. Towards the end of the 19th century, the idea was thrown around of dividing California near Sacramento, some 140 kilometers east of San Francisco. The rugged, Tehachapi Mountains separating the 2 cities made transportation tough, but then a proposed highway across the mountain range eased talk of separation. The move to separate continued into the 20th century. In 1941, countries from the mountainous regions of Northern California and Southern Oregon formed a ceremonious secession to create a new state of Jefferson. While this was just that, a ceremony, it had a strong backing from the people in the region. Again, a crisis intervened with the onset of World War II, and the motion was disregarded. Moves for a split into 2 or 3 states have seen regular debate ever since. One of the most active advocates has been Tim Draper, a venture capitalist born in California. In 2014, Draper petitioned for California to be split to 6 smaller states. Draper wanted to gather enough petitions to ensure that his proposal could go to ballot. His argument was that California was too big to be governed effectively and that the smaller states would receive the attention and support that they deserved and needed. The 2014 proposal was rejected for ballot because it was ruled that not enough of the petition signatures were valid. Unperturbed, Draper rallied again in 2017, this time calling for California to be divided into 3 states. The movement was called the Cal 3, and it was based on creating a northern, central, and southern state within California. This too was denied. Of course, you probably would have heard about it. The state Supreme Court ruled that the proposition required major changes to the state constitution, which made it an invalid proposal. Draper and the Cal 3 supporters argued that many Californians were being denied adequate services and infrastructures too because of too much red tape. They pointed to failed and relocating businesses, a struggling education system, and a lack of quality roads, bridges, and hospitals throughout the state. This has been the rallying call for all supporters of a 3-state California. Smaller-sized states can be run more efficiently with more attention in areas in need of assistance and funding. Draper and fellow advocates have also reasoned that creating these states will naturally lead to increased competition, creating higher standards in business and education. Proponents for a 3-state California also point to the increased presence of California in Washington. Each American state is allocated 2 senators to the Senate. By creating 3 states, California would effectively have 6 senators instead of the current 2. That's certainly a valid point. California currently has 1 senator for approximately every 19 million Californians. Compare that to a state like Nebraska, which has 1 senator for every 900,000 people. Based on the math, the Californians' vote just doesn't pack the same punch as someone from a less populated state. Despite this push to break the state into smaller, more manageable states, there is still fierce criticism concerning the movement. The biggest opponents are in Congress, where the big decisions are ultimately made. Republicans would be loathing to create two further states, as California is already a traditional Democratic state. Adding another two more likely Democratic states would be unthinkable for conservatives. The only way Republicans would even consider such a drastic move would be if California were to break into an east-west split instead of a north-south split. This is because the conservatives have made some significant inroads in the eastern rural areas of California, although on the whole the state is very much a Democratic stronghold. Others worry that by breaking up California, the world's fifth largest economy may lose some of its cohesion and economic might. Rather, another suggestion is to maintain the status quo and appoint two more governors. This would of course mean tweaking the Constitution, but it would allow California's three main regions to be governed with more focus. Those opposing the separation think that California functions better as a whole. If one region is suffering, the others can help pick up the slack. For example, during America's most recent recession, Southern California's housing boom kept its economy buoyant while the Bay Area was hit hard. Whereas back in the early 1990s, the Los Angeles region relied too heavily on economic growth in its defense sector, causing serious damage to its economy, while Silicon Valley was on the rise. Then, of course, there are the logistics of adding extra states. Deeds and titles, tax restructures, and new zoning laws would be an administrative nightmare. In complete contrast to breaking up into three states, the Yes California movement has pushed for a complete secession from the United States. Its advocates claim that the world's fifth biggest economy could more than manage on its own. They contend that California is a distinct society with its own unique history and culture. Having a diluted say in Congress due to just two senators representing almost 40 million people is another Yes California gripe. They're also tired of having to support flailing states with huge tax revenues that come out of California. This all may be true, but the US Constitution simply doesn't recognize the right to secede. Yes, California supporters might be better off focusing their energies on how to best govern California as an American state. So will California eventually break into separate states? Wouldn't be the first time in America's history. It's happened twice. Maine was once part of Massachusetts and it broke away in 1820. People in Maine had several grievances that led to the separation, such as being underrepresented in government and their timber being priced lower than that from Massachusetts. In 1863, West Virginia broke away from Virginia just weeks before the Battle of Gettysburg broke out. Again, there were similar reasons for the split. West Virginians felt like they were underrepresented in the legislature, overtaxed, and were receiving less funding than they needed. This was a long time ago, though, in a different world. It would seem that, for now at least, the chances of California splitting up into 2 or 3 states is pretty slim. California had long a reputation as a place of progressive thinking and change. It's the place that we look to when we want a hint as to what the future may hold. From the gold fields that gave birth to America's railroads to the huge shipping ports that paved the way for trade with Asia, California's always seemed to have its finger on the pulse. The tech boom and the Silicon Valley miracles all started off in California. California was the first state to legalize the medical use of marijuana and the first to give the okay to have paid family leave. Culturally, too, the Golden State has influenced culture around the world with Hollywood and the civil rights movement of the 70s and 60s. However, to break up this behemoth of a state into smaller states, that might be a bridge too far, even for California.